I hope you got the message from that. You know, when we're non-resistant, we're able to build that bridge to the consciousness of the other individual. When we are not attached, we can build the bridge. What was interesting there is they helped us build the bridge. That person helped build the bridge without intentionally doing so. And so there's this opportunity to love our enemies. And Jesus taught us, love your enemies, do good to those who persecute you. This morning I want to share 3 stories with you. And then we'll finish with a video. And the first story took place at Oxford University in England many years ago. And there was this conclave, if you would, of religious scholars who came together, and they were debating about what is unique about Christianity. What really is unusual about Christianity? Now, these were scholars, and what they said, as somebody suggested, is that other religions, unlike Christianity, did not believe in the incarnation of God through their leaders. And some of the scholars said, no. If you really study, there are a lot of faiths, and there are even empires who believed that God was incarnate in their leaders. So they said, well, you're right. And then they said, well, none of them resurrected. That's unique about Christianity. Oh, no. There are stories in Buddhism. There are stories in Hindu. There are stories throughout history of people who has resurrected, who have risen from the dead. So we're not unique that way. And they continued to discuss this, and one goes, I got it. It's ascension. Jesus ascended. Nobody else ascended. Well, how about our Jewish friend Elijah? Didn't he ascend? Oh, my goodness gracious. Well, we're not unique that way. What in the world? And about that time, C.S. Lewis came into the room, and he was to talk to these folks a little later. And he was sitting there listening to this, and he said, I don't understand what all the ruckus is about. What in the world are you guys? Because the debate became really, as we religious people can get into a debate about religion, we can really get into it. And they were getting into it, and he said, what in the world? And they said, well, here's what we're talking about. What is so unique about Christianity? And he said, well, that's easy. It's grace. And he got quiet. And everybody said, grace. And he said, yeah. We teach that God is unconditional love. Not all faiths teach that. Some faiths understand that, but it's not something they teach. It's not something you hear them verbalize. And so God is unconditional love. It's a gift. You don't have to do anything except open yourself up to it. C.S. Lewis actually believed you didn't have to go through anybody to do it in some of his writings. And so what happens is that, you see, he understood about this power of unconditional love. He understood about Jesus saying, love the Lord their God with all thy heart and all thy mind and all thy soul. And the reason he said it that way is because I think Jesus understood it. If you do that, then what happens, you start to love yourself. And when you love yourself, you then can love your neighbor as yourself. So it's a transformation, if you would, that takes place. The second story takes place in Auschwitz, in a concentration camp. A priest named Maximilian Kolbe was placed in this camp in 1941 because he helped Jewish folks flee the country. He hid them. He did those kind of things. And what happened was he was put into Auschwitz with the other Jewish folks. But he was kind of treated special a little bit. Not because he was a priest, just because he wasn't Jewish. And so they would kind of leave him out of some of the penalties and that type of thing. And then one day, what happened, there was an escape that took place. And in a concentration camp, if someone or anybody even tried to escape, The rule was that they would take 10 of the people who were there, they would put them in an outside cage, and they would let them starve to death together. And so somebody had escaped, and so they started to select 10 people. One of the persons was a Polish Jew named Franciszek Gasawanek. And what he did was he was standing in line, and all of a sudden, as many of us would do, he started to plead. And he said, please, I'm a father. I'm taking care of my children here. I'm taking care of my wife. Please have mercy on me. And they pushed him towards the cage. And then Maximilian Kolbe, that priest, said, let him go, and I'll take his place. So he stepped into this place, and they allowed that to happen. And on August the 14th of 1943, he died in that cage with 9 other folks. Many years later, NBC News caught up with Mr. Gasawanek. And when he did, he was 82 years old. And you know, when something traumatic happens to us, when something really happens to us at a heart level of that nature, we never forget. And when we go back to the moment, when we bring it up out of the past, supposedly, into the present moment, we are very emotional. All of us have experienced that. And so as the camera zoomed in on him, he had tears coming down his eyes as he told the story. Then the camera zoomed around the house. And as they did so, they caught a memorial, if you would, a place where this man was honored, an altar that had been prepared for him. And on it said, in memory of Maximilian Kolbe, he died in my place. Mr. Gasawanek said there was never a day that went by that he did not give thanks for him, that he did not remember him, and that he had tears in his eyes every time. He could never get over the joy, the unconditional love that Mr. Kolbe showed for his fellow human being. Jesus said, greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. There's a third one. I love this story. It's about Teddy Stallard. And the story goes that Teddy was in the 4th grade. When he was in the 3rd grade, his mother had died. And so he took that very hard. And he really went into a state of depression, had no interest in school, had no interest in keeping himself up, would wear dirty clothes to school, would not comb his hair, would not participate in school. And just a little bit, but not much. The kids teased him. The kids didn't like him. He was all alone. And on top of that, Miss Thompson, his teacher, didn't particularly like him. And she didn't treat him in any particular way. She just kind of was apathetic to him. And you know, the opposite of love is apathy, not anger, not hate. And certainly Teddy felt that. It was Christmas, and Miss Thompson had lots of gifts on her desk. And when I taught school, it was a time when they brought gifts to teachers. I don't know if they do that anymore. And you piled them on your desk, and you open them up in front of the kids. And Miss Thompson was opening them up, and there was one gift there that was in a brown bag. Had Miss Thompson misspelled. And she kept trying to avoid it. And she continued to open gifts until it was obvious that the brown bag was just sitting there, bigger than anything else. And she opened it up, and when she opened it up, the first thing that came out was a bracelet. The bracelet had some rhinestones in it, fake jewelry, many of which had dropped out of the bracelet. And then inside the bag was some cheap perfume. A bottle of perfume was about half used. And Miss Thompson looked and said, "Love, Teddy." And in an inspiration, what she decided to do was to spray the perfume on and then to put the bracelet on. And when she did that, that stopped the laughter in the room. Afterwards, Teddy came up to Miss Thompson and said, "Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Right now, you smell like my mother. Right now, your arm looks like the arm of my mother." And he started to cry. By the end of the year, Teddy had had a revival in his studies and was doing better. But he wasn't the head of the class. He was just doing better. It was a number of years later, when Teddy was graduating from high school, that Miss Thompson got this note. It said, "Miss Thompson, I graduated second in my class. Just wanted you to know." 4 years later, she got another note. "Miss Thompson, I graduated number 1 in my class. I want you to know." 8 years later, she got another note. "Miss Thompson, I am now Theodore Stallard, and I am Theodore Stallard, M.D. And I just want you to know." It was 2 years later she got the note that really touched her deeply. And Teddy said to her, "Miss Thompson, I'm getting married. And my dad passed away a couple of years ago, and obviously you know my mother passed away. Would you come and sit in the seat where my mother sat?" Miss Thompson still had the bracelet and still had some of the perfume left. She just saved it because it meant so much to her. And so she came to the wedding, and she sat there, and as Teddy and his bride moved out, they stopped at Miss Thompson. And Teddy said to her, to his new wife, "This is what my mother smelled like. This is the bracelet that my mother wore. And this is the woman who changed my life." Jesus said, "Treat the least of these as you would treat me." Power of love. Love thy neighbor as thyself. You know, sometimes we just have to stop and think and step into somebody else's shoes. We have to understand that God is grace, total grace flowing in and through you and everybody around you. The only way we separate that is when we get these illusions in our mind that there's something wrong with somebody, or there's something wrong with God, or there's something wrong with life because it's not going along like I thought it would. And when we step into that grace, we are able to become the witness, become the observer, to understand what's going on so that we can step back into the oneness that we are. We're all one. We're all working together to express this love. C.S. Lewis said, "God is grace, unconditional love." Maximilian Kolbe demonstrated love by giving his life for a man who had children, and they became his legacy. Miss Thompson, after receiving the gifts from Teddy when he was in the 4th grade, started to pray and started to say, "Please forgive me the way I see children. I want to see them differently. I want to see them as love. And I want to know that they love me also. I just got to see it that way. I got to experience it that way." You know, when we do that, we can change the world. There is a man that you're all familiar with, Martin Luther King, Jr. And Reverend King wrote these words and said these words from Alabama. Listen to these words.
"Great fellowship of love, bow down at the feet of Jesus. Give us planted on a little hill, strong, and on that tree hangs the most influential character that ever came in this world. Never feel that that tree is a meaningless drama that took place on the stages of history, Oh no, it is a telescope through which we look out into the long distance on a little hill. And on that love of God breaking forth the most influential character that ever came reminder to a power-drunk generation that love is on the way. It is an eternal reminder to a generation depending on nuclear and atomic energy, a generation depending on physical violence, that love is the only creative, redemptive, transforming power. It is a reminder to a power-drunk generation that love is on the way. It is an eternal reminder to a generation and to the eyes of all my brothers in Alabama and all over America and over the world, I say to you, I love you. Creative, redemptive, transforming power into the universe. I was foolish enough to believe that through the power of love somewhere, men of the most healthy in Alabama and all over the world, then we will be in God's kingdom. We will be able to matriculate into the university of eternal life because we had the power to love our enemies, to bless those persons of curses, who even desired to be good to those persons who hated us, be transformed. We even pray to those persons who despitefully used. We will be able to matriculate into the university of eternal life because we had the power to love our enemies, to bless those persons of curses, who even desired to be good to those persons who hated us. We even pray to those persons who despitefully used us.
We are changing the world. We are changing the world because our lives are transformed. And it's the power of love. It is the power of love that creates this wonderful, wonderful, exciting opportunity to see life more abundantly. And when we do that, we bring more people into that abundance. And speaking of abundance, we probably have a number of visitors with us this morning. So how many people are visiting here for the first time this morning? Would you raise your hands, please? My goodness gracious, you got to go back to the back, Barbara. Does everybody have a little booklet that talks about? Anybody that does not have the little green booklet,